down. The Mubarak regime sold us this bill of goods. The Bin Ali regime, all of the dictatorships in the Arab world.
And also the American liberals about the captive Arab mind, you remember?
I won't even begin to talk about the American media and the degree to which there is a lemming-like chase, everybody chasing everybody else's tail, to talk about how backwards the Arabs are and how we're going to all be eaten up by the Islamic bogeyman if the secret police don't keep them down.
Sarah Hirsch, D word, I mean, what's up with that? They can't say dictator?
Talk about the failure of the American press at that moment when the vice president said, I wouldn't call him a dictator. The next question is, are you out of your mind? But of course,
there's two elements to that. So first of all, there is a special relationship between this client in Egypt and this administration or its previous administrations.
Egypt was a big player in the war in Gaza. This is Cheney Bush. This is not Obama.
This recent war, 2008.
The 08 war, we worked very closely with the Egyptians on intelligence, and the real game was, the game that hasn't been talked about is we were helping the Israelis, and the Egyptians were on the ground in Gaza helping us. We wanted to target the leadership of Hamas, decapitation. And the goal when the bombing began, the first targets for the first 2 days, and smart bombs were used. Bombs we supply the Israelis. I think they're $500,000–$600,000 a package with GPSs. They used smart bombs. They hit the buildings in which we had intelligence, with the aid of the Egyptians on the ground and other assets, where they lived.
You're saying Egyptian intelligence helped Israel in its bombardment of Gaza?
Absolutely. And this is through Suleiman. The relationship is like this.
Nobody in the Arab world is unaware of the fact that the siege on Gaza is an Israeli, Egyptian, American condominium. Right. This is not just the Israelis.
But it's not known here. And so what I'm telling you is after 2 days or so, all of a sudden the Hamas leadership showed up at a news conference. And after that, we went to gravity bombs, which, you know, bombs never go where they're aimed, and these in particular don't go, which raises, I think, all sorts of legal and moral questions, Geneva Convention questions about what was going on. This is a city without any defenses, no air defenses, et cetera, et cetera. But the relationship is so devious and so dirty. I don't think he was Plan A. I know this.
Who's Plan B?
Well,
who's Plan B?
Musa.
Amr Musa.
He may not know it. Plan B is because Plan A won't work. The general's not going to work. Suleiman's not going to work. Musa can come in and maybe he can cut a deal. You can buy time so that you can get your money out, and you also have time to fix the elections.
So is this a soft landing for the regime?
It's not going to work.
Sai is right. You cannot convert the Egyptian military, who are, I think, admittedly the strongest force on the ground, the force that will provide stability. But can they provide reform and change? Is it believable?
Can they?
I don't think so.
Obama's orderly, peaceful transition, what does that mean?
Obama has to square the circle between interests and principle.
Again?
He's now moved on principle. Obviously, an orderly transition is preeminently to be desired by Egyptians and Americans.
But you think,
the really critical question we have to face is who will be the leadership? And you're asking the right question.
Do you trust this regime for a transition?
There are three alternatives for transition. The army, the Muslim Brotherhood, or the youth in the streets.
How could Muslim Brotherhood be a transition?
It can be a transition to itself.
It's not even part of the demonstrations.
Of course it's part of the demonstrations.
They said they're not part of the organization.
They're part of organizing the demonstrations. You'd be surprised.
Are they, Rashid?
The organizers are mainly kids. The Muslim Brotherhood was way behind in this. They've caught up. They're part of the opposition coalition, and they're going to be part of whatever transition
comes
there is.
out.
The question is, are we going to be scared once again into believing that quote-unquote stability, i.e. a regime that we have tentacles into, is the only thing standing between us and the bogeyman? And I am very afraid of the discourse I hear in the American media, and you hear it in some corners of American politics.
Rashid is right, because stability is not the sole. You're right. Stability has to show some movement now. We have to begin to see change. The really interesting question is there a leader or leadership or organization for change that can emerge in sufficient time to take advantage of basically what I think is the right approach, that elections within a reasonable period of time can produce an outcome that will be democratic as opposed to autocratic.
But Seymour Hersh, do you trust this regime, this vice president, this prime minister, to run a transitional period towards democracy?
Absolutely not. Look, the kids out there, they're so far removed from Islamic ideology. They just want, they want they see on television what we have in America. We're very blessed. I think that's it.
Liberty.
But for Israel, this is a 9/11. And if you read what's going on in Israel, all you get is Muslim Brotherhood, all you get is fear talk, and they're in a complete panic.
But
It's unrealistic.
I think this brings us to something that's really important. This is a country which has been strategically important since Julius Caesar, through Napoleon, and to this day. Is everything in the Middle East going to be seen through the lens of a very important but tiny country immediately adjacent to Egypt, or are we going to finally take Egypt seriously for itself?
On its own.
For the largest country in the Arab world, for one of the great centers of Islamic learning, for one of the biggest middle classes in the entire Middle East, as a country which has its own importance and which we, Americans, and people in the Arab world have to understand in itself and for itself? Or are we going to continue to say, well, it depends on what Israel thinks, and all of it has to do with Israel? It doesn't all have to do with Israel.
Can we see that kind of a change in American foreign policy with these present diplomatic corps?
You know what I think. I think that we have a rut in which everybody runs around in the same circle and has done for administration after administration after administration.
But let me just say,
That's true with, unfortunately, this.
They see everything through Israel's prisms? What is it exactly?
They see everything in terms of this shibboleth of stability. We see this in terms of what is good for Israel and what's good for them and their masters, their political masters in Washington electorally every November. And they worry about issues like nuclear non-proliferation and so on, which are legitimate issues, but which tend to lead them, again, to Israel.
You're entirely right, Rashid. I think the notion that the only determinant of our policy on Egypt has to be the attitude in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv is a serious mistake. I don't think it can be discounted.
It shouldn't
because
be
there is
discounted.
great stability in that relationship. But our attitude toward Egypt has to be, what's our vision and hope, and what's the sense we have for the future of Egypt?
What strikes me is what we think and do may not be relevant anymore. We're much less relevant now. It just may not matter. Washington can sit there and worry about, with the Israelis, about the Brotherhood. There's things happening about which we have very little control.
And not just in Egypt,
of course
all over the Arab
world.
Which is probably good.
The danger may be that our effort to try to guide all of this, in fact, will have even more negative repercussions.
So do you think we are now beyond a Pax Americana in the Middle East?
I don't think we ever were. I think we had great influence. I think we have less influence.
You ran the so-called peace process for the last 20 years.
We didn't run it. It didn't go anywhere, and that's one of the problems that we had.
That's
right.
Well,
ran it into the ground.
Ran it into the ground, if you want to say that.
You supported all the autocratic leaders in that region, and you certainly ran two major wars that we haven't seen for a long time. So certainly it's been a Pax Americana.
Wars in the Middle East are not a Pax Americana, Marwan.
It's not peace.
It's Pax, maybe, but not Pax.
Pax Americana, Pax Americana.
Is there now a way ahead for Washington that's different from before, and what is it?
Well, one of the things is to recognize realities and climb back from everybody as an Islamist coming out to, to steal our bacon, and just relax and let's see what happens. Don't forget, it was 13 years between the Tea Party and the revolution. It was, I remember in 76.
Our 18th century Tea Party.
Yeah, our 18th century Tea Party. Yes,
Get that straight.
Let's get that
Please.
straight.
Which
and also,
revolution?
In 1976, when I was at the New York Times, I remember hearing people say to me, the Shah's going to go. It took 3 years.
Aside from the word America, what has been peculiarly absent from everything we've seen the last 6 weeks? We haven't seen a single so-called jihadi. We haven't seen a word or anything about anything called terrorist. Ayman Zawahir is nowhere to be seen. Osama bin Laden is probably the biggest loser of what's going on. So what does that say when you're basing your entire policy on war on terror, when actually the region is going elsewhere?
About money. It's about poverty. It's about wanting jobs, no jobs, joblessness. That's why you have to think about Morocco in terms of the joblessness there, Algeria.
But now it's gone beyond that. It's not just social justice. It's not just equality and opportunity. It's also now freedom. Freedom of expression, democratic system.
Freedom from want.
The four freedoms, if you want.
But it's not about instilling an Islamic regime of Sharia. It's not.
That's one of the amazing things about what we've been seeing. Nobody's saying Islam huwa al-hal. Islam is the solution. They're saying Tunis is the solution.
So you think this country's obsession with the idea of a threat of Muslim Brotherhood is exaggerated,
we
misplaced?
We were sold a bill of goods about Islamic fundamentalism. We were told that was the only issue. It is an issue, but it is not the only issue. The real issue is economic opportunity. The real issue is security regimes and police states that have in fact increased the danger of terrorism. And the real issue is freedom.
So should the United States continue to support those other autocratic, authoritarian security regimes in the region, Ambassador?
Look, we cannot.
Can I get a yes or no answer from you?
I'm about to give you a yes or no answer. We cannot support a situation in which we topple every regime in sight and institute.
Well, at least not support them.
Institute Jeffersonian democracy overnight. You know that. It's a transitional question. I think we have to support our principles.
What does that mean, Ambassador? Is it time to end the occupation so
Of
people,
course it is.
not just in Egypt, but also in Palestine, can have freedom?
Of course it is.
That's the question.
Of course it is.
So why is this administration stuttering when it comes to Egypt, when it comes to Israel, when it comes to Jordan?
Rashid, more beautifully than I did, explained. And that has to change. Just as, in fact, I think we have to watch. We can perhaps steer from time to time, but we have to be very careful we do not make things worse than they are. Let me just address one thing. All this euphoria about the absence of the Islamic Brotherhood may be, on the surface, a very important conclusion, but be careful.
But it's not
They
euphoria.
have not changed their overall
What's
view.
wrong with the Islamic Brotherhood being part and parcel of a political horizon in Egypt?
Because in effect,
Who's to say no?
the notion that Islamic Brotherhood, that the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan, is a democratic alternative for Egypt is an oxymoron.
I don't understand.
That
If
we
the
do
people
not-
voted for the Islamic Brotherhood and they made up 25% of the next parliament, what's wrong with that? Christian Democrats
I'm worried
are
about.
in
I'm worried
Germany.
about. I'm worried about 45%. I'm worried about.
Yeah, but who is this? This is again the problem with the paternal approach to the Arab world. Isn't it time that the Arab world self-determine their future without Israel or the United States?
I think they're
telling
going
them
to,
what
but
do?
that doesn't mean that I have no reason to be concerned about some alternatives.
Tom, do you think the Arabs want to drive Israel into the sea? You think that's their ultimate goal?
Nobody is suggesting that Israel, with all of its physical power and might, is about to be driven into the sea. I think that there is an opportunity now for Israel and the Palestinians and the United States, which has been notably reluctant in this, to do something that they haven't done,
Ambassador,
is to put Palestinians on the same road that the Egyptians
Yeah,
are
but
on.
it seems to me that we're as if we haven't really caught up with what just happened over the last 6 weeks. I mean, don't you think now, with the Egyptian regime imploding, that there is no more peace process?
I don't think so.
You think the United States will
Israel
continue to
isn't,